Okay, so this is the second part to topic 7.3 for AP Bio. So this is convergent evolution, and at the very end, I'll talk very quickly about divergent evolution. So when we talk about convergent evolution and what is it, let's first think of the word convergent. So convergent means like to kind of come together or to converge. And so when we compare this or relate this to life and evolution over time, we can talk about two species who do not share a recent common ancestor. So evolutionarily, they're like very distantly related, if at all. And basically, in convergent evolution, due to similar selective or environmental pressures, you have these like this independent evolution or independent development of these similar traits because of similar environmental pressures. Let me go ahead and show you a few examples to help put this into something you can like visualize. So if we look at some unrelated species, so here we have a shark that is a what's called a cartilaginous fish, and so they don't have a skeleton. So sharks fall under the category of gnathostomes, and they evolved like 400 million years ago or something. Then we have a dolphin, which is a mammal. We have a tuna, which is a bony fish, actually has a skeleton. And then we have a penguin, that's a bird, right? So these four species do not share a common ancestor with a streamlined body. So when we look at what they all have in common, their body has a certain like shape. And so that shape, that streamlinedness, and then they have like fins or flippers, that trait has been selected for speed through the water. So all of these organisms live in a similar ecological niche, right? They live in the ocean, and speed is important for their survival and reproduction. So this streamlined body has evolved independently in these different lines due to similar selective pressures. So if we look at like the dolphin, that's a mammal, and the penguin, that's a bird, right? They both have this streamlined body type because that shape actually is going to be like selected for. Think about like a boxy fish. A boxy fish isn't going to be able to swim fast versus the streamlined shape is for speed. Now, another thing I didn't even realize until I'm sitting here looking at these pictures is also the coloration. If you compare the shark, the tuna, and the penguin, and even the dolphin, they all have that dark top part on their like back, their dorsal fin area, and then their belly is light. Now, I want you to think about if you've ever been in a swimming pool and you swam down to the deep end and you look up on a sunny day. When you're down in the bottom of the pool and you look up, the sunlight is up there. So when we talk about like, look at the shark, for example. This phenotype, this coloration is due to natural selection. If you are a fish and a shark is swimming above you, their white belly is going to camouflage with the sunlight. And their dark back, if you're on top of the water and you're looking down, their dark back is going to camouflage with the depths of the ocean. And look at all of these pictures. They all have that dark back and that light colored belly. And so those traits would be selected for by natural selection through similar selective pressures, even though they do not have a common ancestor that had a dark back and a light colored belly, right? And so those traits have evolved independently in these different species due to the similar environment and selective pressures. Now, if we look at another example, here we have a hawk moth and a hummingbird that both eat nectar from flowers. And so a hawk moth, if you've never seen it, has a really long, it's called a proboscis. So it's not a nose, but a proboscis, it's like an extension that comes off and it actually like coils up. And they use that to get into the flower and get their nectar. And the hummingbird has evolved a long beak. And these animals are able to like hover in place while they feed and get the nectar. And yet an insect and a bird, a hummingbird, these do not share a common ancestor with a long proboscis and wings. Right? So we have a bird who's an endotherm, warm-blooded organism, and an insect. They do not have a common ancestor that flew with the proboscis, but rather similar environments, similar selective pressure have favored similar phenotypes that have evolved independently in the two species. And now when we say convergent evolution, they have evolved to look very similar, even though they don't share a common ancestor with these traits. Another example is, Oh, my video. I'm sorry, my words are cut off at the bottom a little bit. Okay, so now let's go ahead though and look at flight. So another example of convergent evolution, we have birds, bats are mammals, and then here we have a flying fish. So these, and if you even think about like dinosaurs, some of them flew in the air, right? So wings are another example of convergent evolution that evolved independently. Like this bat and this bird do not share a common ancestor that had wings. So wings evolved independently in those two lines. And what's next? Okay, so this is my last example that we're going to, oh, you like the flight? My last example, let's go ahead and talk about millions of years ago when our land masses on planet Earth were connected, right? And over time, due to tectonic plates, what we can see is we have the movement of our land masses over millions of years. And so if we look at North America and Australia, so Australia broke off of the rest of the landmass before true placental mammals evolved. So in Australia, there are no native species of placental mammals. Now, mammals and marsupials, which is what you find in Australia, do have a common ancestor, but it was millions of years ago. I don't remember exactly how many, like millions of years, but a very, very, very long time ago. And so they both have fur, you know, and they do have a lot of like commonalities. However, a real like recent common ancestor doesn't exist. So when we look at species though that you find in North America and in Australia, if you look at like, let's look at the first one here, this placental mammal, a mole, and a marsupial mole. Yo, their body types look very similar. It would be like they had a very recent mole-like ancestor, and now they've like diverged, right? However, they haven't had a common ancestor in millions of years. But because they both burrow underground, they've evolved like a face for burrowing and then very large hands for digging. Or if you look at the marsupial mouse versus the placental mouse, they didn't have a common ancestor that looked like a mouse, but they live in similar ways. And so due to similar selective pressures, they've evolved to have similar phenotypes. And you can look and compare the rest of the animals, but my favorite example is probably the sugar glider and the flying squirrel of North America. So both of these species live high up in the trees of forests. And they, if they jump from one branch to the next, they have evolved to have this extra flap of skin to help them glide. I think I read somewhere that like the flying squirrel can glide like 30 meters or something like that. And so they have large eyes for living, being nocturnal. And yeah, so when you look at these two species, it'd be very easy to mistake them as a like having a really recent common ancestor that had flaps of skin, large eyes, bushy tails. But in reality, natural selection has occurred in these different environments on totally different continents. But because of similar selective pressures, they have favored these traits in these organisms. And so now they have evolved to look very similar, even though it's not due to a shared ancestral line. So convergent evolution is when two species who are distantly related or not related at all really have evolved to look similar due to similar selective pressures. And so I think I have one last slide real fast. So let's just compare it real fast or contrast it to divergent evolution. So in divergent evolution, it's where you have a common ancestor, a recent common ancestor, and then the different species have evolved or diverged to become more different. So where in convergent evolution, they're evolving to look very similar, not from a recent common ancestor. In divergent evolution, it's where they're diverging out. So here we have like the evolution of mammals. So we have a mammal common ancestor with the characteristics of like hair, live birth, mammary glands, warm-blooded. I think there's 5 and I can only think of 4 right now. But anyway, so those are traits that all mammals share, but we have diverged into different ecological niches and become like different species. All right, great job.